All right, welcome back to the Harbor.Church podcast. We are digging into a second helping of our service from this past weekend. We were online only, taking a little rest as a church family. We try to practice what we preach, and there's a lot of people that put in a lot of time and effort and energy into hosting our community, especially at Christmas time. So we took a chance to hang at home and worship together from our separate couches.
Always good.
Yeah, which is good stuff.
Especially a few weeks ago, I had to preach on rest. So, not a bad time after all the craziness that we put in to let everybody sit back and do that. And I liked it also because it was rounding out the fifth and final week of that special delivery series. So.
Yeah, and you talked to us about what Jesus brings, which was the whole special delivery series, but you kind of wrapped it all up in this idea of the gospel and the gospel message and how that works itself out in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of good news that Jesus brought to the table when he came to earth, and that he still brings to us every day as we follow him. And then kind of the cherry on top, if you will, was this idea of grace and this that you had kind of been building over the course of this series. You want to talk to us a little bit about that? The thought behind that?
I didn't want to make it too obvious at the beginning because some people they lose sight of what's happening. Like I wanted to focus on the encounters, and then I wanted to focus on the compassion, but I was reverse spelling grace with the E the first week, the C of compassion, the A of awakening, the R of redemption, and then the G of the Gospels, all individually true and great things that God brought to us, but the entire gift of Jesus was a gift of grace. Yeah. And so like the whole thing, like that's, if Jesus is what's inside the package, the wrapping, the bow or whatever, however you want to use that analogy, man, it was God's grace to us that he gifted his only begotten son, because grace is by definition not getting or getting something that you don't deserve. Right. It's unmerited favor. It's you didn't earn it. We don't deserve Jesus, and that's why it's such a cool gift. Yeah. And so like I loved that aspect of it, and I didn't want to take away from the gospel. Jesus brought the gospel. He brought the good news. He brought a message, and I want people to lean into that. But I wanted to make sure that everybody, all of our listeners, and anybody who heard that message knew that every single one of those, the encounters, was a gracious act. The compassion, of course, was grace. You can see that maybe a little bit more than in the others. The awakening, he doesn't have to wake us up. He could let us sleep in sinful slumber, The redemption, all of those are grace. They're all things that speak to him loving us. Now, Katie, do you know the difference between mercy and grace?
I do.
You want to tell our listeners?
Yeah, actually, I heard a really good, and you can take over and give maybe a clearer definition, but I heard a great analogy for this the other day, like a week or two ago, that really helped me wrap my brain around it, and might help some of our listeners too. So you talked about grace being unmerited favor. So mercy, the way I heard it told, and I forget who said it, or I would give them credit, but mercy is not getting the punishment you deserve, right? Mm-hmm. So mercy and grace is you get pulled over for speeding, right? Well, maybe not all of us have been there. I know you and I have been there.
I mean, maybe
once or twice, it's rare.
Once.
But so you're speeding, like you're for sure going over the speed limit. You are breaking a law. You get pulled over.
I'm actually guilty of.
You are guilty of the crime.
Which would never happen for me.
Would never happen. This is purely hypothetical. But if it did.
Every time we do these illustrations, it happens. So now I'm going to get a freaking ticket because we made this podcast.
Sorry, dog. But so mercy is the police officer pulling you over and saying, I'm going to let you go. You are guilty. You deserve punishment. You deserve a ticket. But I'm going to let you go. That's mercy. And that's a beautiful gift. And God gives us that. Yeah. Grace is you very much deserve a ticket. The cop pulls you over. He says, not only am I going to let you go, I'm actually going to pay for the ticket that you deserve. And you know what? Actually, here's everything that I have in my wallet. It's above and beyond. It's not only getting away with not getting the punishment that you for sure are guilty for and should have repercussions for. It's then getting a good thing in return that you for sure did not earn. It is not based on your behavior. It is just an outpouring of love and blessing that you did nothing to earn. It is actually the opposite of what you should have earned.
That's a lot more applicable. I learned it from a much more medieval standpoint. Maybe because I reference it always in biblical times, but the ideas of mercy, begging for mercy, pleading for mercy, getting mercy or grace from a king. When a conqueror would come in, an emperor, a king, somebody would conquer the land, you had to throw yourself on the mercy of the court, the mercy of the king. You go to his court and you would beg for mercy. And the application there was, and we don't understand this in our context today, we just don't get it. But if you went to war with another nation and lost, the act of going to war meant you're going to try to kill each other.
Right.
If they win, if they defeat your army or whatever, you are in essence saying my life is forfeit.
Yeah.
Like, because we went to war and I lost, I deserve death.
I expect to die. Yeah.
And so to throw yourself on the mercy, anytime you would rebel against a king, mutiny, kind of, whether that was like internal, it was your own king, or whether it was another country and you lost, you would beg the king for mercy. Like, please don't kill me. I don't think we get it because, and I'm not trying to make this a history lesson, but just so we can understand the context for a person living in a biblical time. Yeah. There's always fighting. There's always, wars. There's always this stuff going back and forth. And there wasn't treaties and, ways to conduct yourself. It was just invade. There's just a lot of pillaging, raping, enslaving, like mass murder, So it was very violent times. Yeah. And if you push back and lost, the expectation was you're going to die. So when people talk about like rebelling against God, and the fact that we as his creation don't love him, don't honor him, we in fact act in a sin nature. I mean, how many people deny God's existence right now? How many people have thumbed their nose at God? If he's this all-powerful, amazing creator God, and we don't acknowledge him, we do anything short of just lovingly, sacrificially serve him. That's where I don't think people understand the passages in the Bible that say he's our master. We like this idea of he's our buddy. Right. We don't like this idea of being enslaved. It literally says like you're a slave to one or the other. Yeah. We don't like the idea of being a slave to God, but we don't understand the imagery of the day. Right. Even the people that Jesus walked and talked with, those Jews, they were ruled over by a Roman dictatorship, a Roman conquering military presence. They were not there willingly wanting to serve. Yeah,
very little freedom or democracy. Yeah.
And so to say mercy, to say I need mercy was to say, hey, like I've pushed back. I don't deserve life, but would you give it to me anyways?
Spare me.
Mercy would be your first thing, right? Like, please don't kill me. And I think a lot of people, they miss out on the grace of God because mercy is this forefront, like we deserve hell. Like, mercy, please God, don't send us to hell. We deserve it. Like, I deserve, because of my sin, because of my rebellious nature, I deserve hell. The mercy I'm asking for is not hell. And Jesus is mercy embodied. Because of Jesus paying our debt, we don't have to go to hell. That is mercy, unlike something we'll never fully understand at this side of heaven. Yeah. We can't grasp it. But what would then be the grace side, Katie? What do I get? So like, where is the Jesus bringing grace? Where's the grace of God? Besides the fact that we didn't deserve Jesus and he gave to Jesus anyways. We did deserve to be left alone and he didn't give us that. So the mercy of sending, he could have sent an angel, right? That would have still been merciful. Yeah. The gracious thing was he sent his son. And Jesus doesn't just offer us a release from hell, an opportunity to have our sins forgiven and avoid hell, but he also then gives us heaven. You want to talk about a gracious gift. To your point, like a cop giving me all the money in his wallet would blow my mind, right?
Yeah, that's never going to happen.
Right, that would never. Like you put that online and it would blow up. It would go viral in a minute. But we don't think anything. I mean, most Christians don't even think twice about a God who not only doesn't send them to hell, but then's like, oh, by the way, I'm going to give you heaven.
Yeah, I actually have a way better thing for you.
Yes,
Beyond what you can imagine.
The greatest thing you could ever imagine times infinity. That's what I'm going to gift you.
Yeah.
My creation, my speck of dust that thumbs its nose at me all the time, disobeys me all the time, downplays me and worships other things instead of me. I'm going to give you heaven. Like, talk about not just mercy, but the grace of God. And
I think we miss some of that too, even this side of heaven. Obviously, that is the ultimate gift, but we also get a relationship with Him daily. Like, we get to find purpose.
Oh yeah, the grace of God is not limited just to heaven.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah, like it starts
talk about it.
immediately. Like, we get to, man, I remember before Jesus, like, life sucks and it seems kind of pointless and dark and there is a lot of suffering. And then through Jesus, we find not only that mercy, but the grace of like, oh, I can be a part of something bigger. I can have an internal impact through God and the work of the Holy Spirit in my life, so that I'm not just trying to get by. But God, Jesus said, I come to bring life and life abundant.
Yeah. Yeah. We don't appreciate that. Like, I mean, Christians will say they do. But just you talking, I'm like, yeah, I think about heaven. And if I really think about heaven, okay, I was graced with that. But how many other things I've been graced with? I don't deserve anything. And yet God gives us so much. It goes back to that whole thing of like, what should you be thankful for? A lot of us will act like if something bad happens, I got a ticket. Go back to that. Like, I don't, so woe is me. Hey, you have a car to drive.
Right.
You didn't get arrested.
Yes.
You could count 50 blessings,
right?
But you and I will tend to focus on the one negative,
the bad
right?
thing, yeah. And especially in that scenario, like, something that we did to ourselves, like, and still,
let's ignore that. Let's not even talk about that. Yeah, let's not even talk.
That's reality. Like, oh, I got a ticket. Like, yeah, you were speeding, which I do not say from a high horse by any means.
Yeah, no,
don't get in a car with me. But yeah.
So here's the thing, John, chapter 1, verse 16. It says, "From His fullness we have received grace upon grace." So this is a cool verse in that it's saying, in all of who God is, it's more grace than what we can actually count, like what we can actually understand. I can't grasp it. Why do you think, Katie, what do you think it is that the average listener, you and I, for example, why do we miss out so much on comprehending or appreciating or celebrating or sharing the grace of God? Why is that so hard for us to do?
Yeah. I think for me, it's because I generally want to take the weight of my salvation back onto myself. I really get stuck in the idea of earning God's love and grace.
Come on.
And then it stops being grace because
that.
It's something that I worked for, even though I can't. And I know the truth of that. And even so, I find myself stuck in a rut of trying to check boxes, which then makes me not at all grasp how good God is being to me. Because then I'm like frustrated and tired and exhausted because I'm trying to do it on my own strength.
Well, maybe you say that, and that's yeah, absolutely. But what about the fact that I need to feel valuable? I need to feel valuable about myself. I need to. How do I say this? There is a part of us when you're saying, like, I want to earn my salvation.
Yeah.
If I put it all on the grace of God, right? If I put it all on the grace of God, then Josh not only doesn't earn it, he gets no credit for it. Yeah. And Josh has to further admit that Josh isn't as good as he wishes he was, right?
Humbling, yeah.
So it's humility, like grace and mercy too. I'm not trying to take it away from mercy, but grace forces a humility. If I recognize I am getting something I don't deserve, I have to admit that I don't deserve it. And there's a part of me, and I think that's why in Ephesians he says it's by grace through faith that you've been saved. And he's speaking directly in Ephesians there against works.
Yeah, so that you can't boast about it. It says,
can't boast.
You would if you could. I would if I could.
If it was faith without grace, like I believe, but it's because of how smart I am and how strong I am and how
I figured it out.
Yeah, I figured it out. Then there's no grace there. It was I deserve it because I did the hard work, right? I earned this letter grade. Like salvation is is a GPA, and I'm just getting better and better at learning how my salvation works. Well, yes, I can grow in my walk with God, but even that is the grace of God to reveal himself to me, that I even have an opportunity to do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, and it says he's the author and perfecter of our faith. So like he gets all the credit. Like he started it, he's making it better. Like he's walking with us as we improve and grow in our relationship to him.
So let me flip this, because I want to land the plane, but I want our listeners to think about this as they're diving into a second helping. Maybe the cherry on top is that as we experience more of God's grace, we can show more of God's grace. What do you think, Katie, is an example or a way that a believer could show more grace? We barely understand how much grace we're receiving,
right?
But how about being the people that give grace? That seems to be very uncommon.
Yeah.
And like mercy is something our world still vaguely values, and it's still seen as this really admirable thing. And it's a little bit expected. But what about grace? What about being a people called by his name, where he increases and we decrease? If he's increasing, then my grace should be increasing, right? What's that look like for me to increase and everything else decrease?
Yeah, the first thing that came to mind, and I'm maybe too practically minded for this question, but what came to mind for me is for a long time I worked at a coffee shop. It was very early mornings, which means your relationship to the person that closed the day before was really important. Because if they didn't do what they were supposed to do, man, it sucked for your day, because you're there at 4 a.m. and you know exactly what you have to do. And if they didn't, fill all the sugar packets or whatever it was, it throws off your entire day.
You individually filled sugar packets?
No, that was a terrible example. Shut up.
I can just see you opening those
just
tiny little
carefully.
sweet loads.
Yeah.
Pouring in just
it's like,
enough.
Katie, why'd you get fired from that coffee shop job?
Like,
I took it upon myself.
I was recycling the empties.
Yeah, I thought that's what you wanted.
Back up. I mean, isn't that a good thing?
Anyway, point is, I remember us as a staff, we had a meeting one time because there was some bad blood happening between coworkers for that reason of stuff wasn't getting done, and then the person was annoyed the next day.
Sure.
Even though we were all guilty of sometimes being the one who didn't do the thing.
Right.
And we had to have a conversation about grace, which was essentially maybe that person did not do everything that was expected of them. You have the choice to be frustrated and mad and annoyed with them and set off your day in that tone. Or you have the option to assume the best of them and love them, because these are people that you love. And then not only that, but then turn around and do better at the end of the day for the next person that's coming. That might be that very person that screwed you today. You get that chance. And I know not everybody works at a coffee shop, but I think that's true in a practical way. At home doing the dishes, or in your spouse, in your family, there's opportunity to... People are going to treat you badly all the time, on purpose or not. And we have the opportunity to either let that ruin our relationship, or to say, you know what, God poured out grace on me that I didn't deserve, so I'm going to actually turn around and serve you instead of being annoyed at you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we would much rather receive grace,
Yeah.
but when it comes our turn to give it, we've got a lot of excuses for why we don't.
Yeah.
But that's where you and I as believers, and people listening, if you're a child of God, if you're somebody who claims to be a Christian, we believe that we reap what we sow. And that, if we're extending the grace of God, maybe we don't get it where we want it, but God sees that. Yeah. And how many times do we desperately wish to have somebody give us mercy and grace? But when it's our turn to offer it, we have all their excuses for why we don't have to be the one to do that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's a very easy to see in others and very hard to see in myself.
Absolutely.
But I love the illustration. I'm setting up the next person for success.
Yeah.
Grace allows me to do that. And the grace of God sending not only his son Jesus, but then Jesus showing up and what's Jesus doing? He heals people. That's grace. The people Jesus touches doesn't have to be healed. He doesn't have to heal them.
Yeah.
And I think a little bit of that, and we could have this conversation on another podcast, but what's it look like for Jesus to heal some of the people and not the others? Doesn't mean he doesn't love them. I mean, there was thousands and thousands of people coming all the time, every day.
Right. He didn't heal them all.
Yeah, and when he goes to the pool of Shalom, when he heals the one guy, there's other people there that are crippled. He doesn't just heal everybody, but that doesn't mean he doesn't love them. Doesn't mean he's not merciful or gracious. But when he extends grace in one way to one person and in one way to another, like he heals the lame man and makes his legs whole again, but then he calls Peter to be his disciple. Okay, well, that's grace to give Peter, a fisherman, a much greater job and calling. And then it was grace to the leper or the crippled man who he heals him. You know, like, all right, so maybe God's grace in your life looks totally different. And this is where the Bible tells us not to compare. And I think this is where Christians get lost. Is I'll look, you know, the old saying, the grass is greener on the other side, right? Well, I look at God's grace in your life and I'm like, that's not fair. God loves her more.
Why did I get that? Yeah.
Right. I'm just discounting God's grace, like where God's grace is in my life because I don't have what I want, what I see you have.
Right.
And I think a lot of times we miss out on that. That does not mean God's not gracious or loving or merciful.
Yeah. We're just not looking in the right place.
Yeah. And any, I mean, you think about your own life. You have got so much of God's grace in your life, but if you looked at it through a selfish lens, through a fleshly lens, you could easily pick the people around you and talk about how much better they have it. And I'm sure if our listeners and watchers are honest, you know, like you and I are tempted at times to just go see other people in their world doing their thing, you know, and like, okay, I wish I had it like them. I wish I was like them. I wish I had what they have.
Right.
And God's like, I'm letting them go through battles that you have no clue about.
Right.
And you're only seeing the grace that I'm showing them that I'm not showing you. How about you count your own blessings? But that once again requires a maturity that we're not always able to have.
Yeah, and trusting that God actually knows what I specifically need.
Yeah, and I hope that if you're listening to this today, you recognize that God has grace for you, and He gives it out abundantly, and He is not wanting either of us or any of our listeners to feel like we're abandoned or forsaken or without His love. He just may be allowing you to go through a valley that's different than the valley I'm going through. And Satan will always be whispering in your ear to compare yourself to somebody else. And then to use that comparison to like somehow display that God doesn't love us, when in fact, God's plan for us is so uniquely crafted that He knows exactly what's best for us, including which valleys we go through and which ones we don't.
Yeah.
And so I think, you know, this has kind of gone from grace to a bitterness lesson, but how many times if I truly leaned into the grace of God, would I be less bitter?
Oh yeah.
You know, man, like, okay, it's not everything that I thought I wanted, but God actually knows more than what I want. He knows what I actually need.
Yeah, it's better than what we would even ask.
Oh, heck yeah. So like, I hope Katie, for you and for everybody else, you start looking at the gifts of God, and not just at Christmas time, like all the time. Man, there is an encounter with God. There is a compassion of God. There is an awakening from God. There is a redemption from God. There is this gospel message to like keep going on from God. And all of that, plus everything else you see in Scripture, is a picture of the grace of a king who would extend to a people that have rebelled against him gifts that they don't deserve, whether it be heaven or whether it be just the ability to walk around and talk and carry on with a life that has purpose. I mean, how cool is that?
Yeah, doesn't get much better. And bonus points to you for being able to spell grace backwards that many times correctly.
You know, listen, I've worked on it. I practiced it a lot. You know me. And it was not easy. But
all right, thank you guys for tuning in.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we'll check in again in the new year.
All right, guys. Bye.